So I texted Taylor earlier this week, and I just said, we just don't have time for you this week. There's nothing really to talk about. There's absolutely nothing in your past that would bring up anything of interest other than games you have this weekend. And Taylor said, I'll drive to Waco, sit in your studio, and I will boycott. Taylor McHargue of ESPN joins us on 365 Sports. Have you worn anything but Rice jerseys all week long?
We filmed All-American, our show at the American Conference yesterday, and I really had every intention to put on my old uniform. But very humbling to put on your football uniform 10 years later, and we decided that was not going to end up on camera. But, yes, I have been in some form of Rice gear all week, and I have Rice this weekend. So at some point I'm going to have to drop my fandom and my love for that school. I guess it'll be sometime right around kickoff.
Taylor, what did that game mean to Rice, and what does it mean for Dana Holgorsen at Houston?
Well, for Rice, it means that they legitimately have a chance if you look at their next few weeks. I think there's a real clear path where if they beat the teams that they should and the games that they're favored, that Rice could make a bowl game in their first year in the American Conference. And Rice made a bowl game last year, the first one under head coach Mike Bloomgren, but they did that at 5-7 and ultimately ended the season with a losing record. So everything, all the messaging in the offseason and the messaging so far from Rice is that they feel like they're ready to take the next step. And part of that was you had to beat some teams that you weren't going to be favored against. Rice has a really tough stretch of their schedule where they play SMU, Tulane, and UTSA back to back, and so they need to get some of these wins early in the season before they go through that stretch. But that was a huge first step for them. On the other side, obviously, and I'm looking at the same stuff everybody else is, but Dana Holgorsen, fans around that program are frustrated clearly, and it's not just losing to your rival and losing to Rice, but I think it goes back to performance in the back half of last season. Even though they beat UTSA in week one, it was kind of a sloppy game. And it was closer than I think they expected it to be in their first year in the Big 12. And if you look around the Big 12, even with some of the teams that are struggling more than we expected, I think it's safe to say Houston may be the worst team in the Big 12 this year.
Yeah, I think there's an argument to be made. I mean, we'll see what Baylor does eventually, but West Virginia as well. But yeah, I think that you're onto something with that, and it just seems like there's not a lot of positive energy there for that program right now. Taylor, everybody's talked Texas, Alabama to death at this point, but I mean, with you being a former quarterback, I was curious about your thoughts. Obviously, Quinn Ewers was, from the quarterback's perspective, very good. Jalen Milroe, deep balls, awesome. A lot of the other stuff was very hit or miss. Just from a QB's perspective, how did you view those two last weekend in that monster game?
Yeah, well, look, I would take a 30,000-foot view and take a step back on the SEC in general, and I think the SEC quarterback play this year is pretty poor. And you look across the conference, usually in the last few years, there's been a first-round draft pick or two in the SEC, and that's a big reason why they've had so much success. But it's just not there this year. The top quarterback play is in conferences like the Big 10, the Big 12, and the Pac-12. I thought the piece that stood out to me the most for Quinn Ewers against Rice, 0 for 7 on passes beyond 15 yards. They just didn't hit any shot plays. And obviously they corrected some of that against Alabama. And that's when you need to do it, right? It's far more important for you to hit your explosives against Alabama than it is against Rice. And I thought that was the step that you hoped that you would see out of Quinn Ewers if you're a Texas fan, and they certainly did. And now look, I mean, these odds, it doesn't mean anything until they go out and perform, but now they are right there tied with Ohio State with the best odds in the country to make the playoff just in week 2. So I think the hype train is obviously full speed ahead for Texas, and they've got a couple tests coming up. I think they're coming to Baylor for their opener in Big 12 play in a couple weeks, and then obviously Oklahoma. But again, the hype train is well on its way for Texas.
What did you see? And I, in my opinion, I saw just a team that kind of just hung together, especially when they fell behind, which a lot of teams would have crumbled in Tuscaloosa. They didn't blink. What did you see differently from Texas winning a game like this early than perhaps other years in the last decade?
Yeah, I think a couple things. Number one, people made a mistake for the last few years. The Texas is back joke where the talent that Texas has on its roster now is different than what they've had since 2009. And there's been stretches where certainly there were 5 stars on the team, but from a depth perspective, especially up front, offensive and defensive line, man, they are stacked. And that gives you the opportunity to be in every single game, no matter who you're playing. And then the other piece that's just more of a what you want to see out of a team is they believe. I mean, you could just tell watching them, and especially going back and talking. You just talked about coming from behind and fighting through adversity. That to me stood out because that was not something we've seen from Texas for a long time. And it just points out again that they truly believe in the guys that they have, the staff that they have, and they've got one goal, and it's winning the Big 12, being undefeated, and making it to the college football playoff. That is the key goal for them.
Taylor, if you look at Texas A&M, the offense certainly looks better, but everything else doesn't look better. What do you think is the future for them this season?
Yeah, their secondary is certainly taken a step backwards, and some of that was guys that they had gotten through the hell of splashes in NIL and 5 stars that had come in that were young. A lot of those guys moved on, and I thought the secondary is going to be a challenge for them all year. Now, Miami on the other side is a much better Miami team than the Miami team that came to Kyle Field last year. I think A&M they are improved as well, but this is not a playoff contender. This is at best, middle of the pack SEC West team that I think their ceiling is 9 wins. And I think, the floor for them is probably 6 wins. It'll be somewhere in there. But this is not going to be a team that I think you see regularly upset teams that they're not favored against.
Taylor McHargue, former Rice quarterback with us, college football analyst with us on 365 Sports. So when anybody in the group of 5, in particular UTSA with a nice bounce-back win after the loss to Houston, which I know just eats away at Jeff Traylor, is there anybody in the group of 5 right now, Tulane and anyone else other than Tulane, that jump out at you?
Yeah, there is. And it's actually, I had some things get switched around last week, and so I got to see them in person. SMU, they played at Oklahoma, and they had the better quarterback at SMU than Oklahoma did. Preston Stone outplayed Dylan Gabriel for basically that entire game. And they've got some depth at the group of 5 level. Oklahoma, now again, it was against Arkansas State, but Oklahoma hung 73 points, pitched a shutout on defense in their opener. And all of the things that you saw that offense did well, SMU took all of that away. Oklahoma in the second half decided we're just going to have to run the ball right at these guys because we can push them around some physically, and that's what they did. But I thought that was alarming that, Rhett Lashley said in his post-game presser, we did not give up the explosive plays to them. We made them earn it, and he was exactly right. And for SMU, they have an opportunity now where they still have TCU to play. But after that, I think there is a legitimate chance if they were to upset TCU, which I'm not even sure that would be an upset at this point. If they upset TCU and run the gauntlet in conference play, that's going to be your top group of 5 team, especially with just a close loss to Oklahoma. Now, that's a lot to ask of a team,
sure.
But I thought they have the capability and the talent, and also it's just a team that I don't think a lot of people are talking about yet.
And I don't know this, Taylor, and I probably should. When you were at Rice, did they run any of the flex bone or the bone, anything like that, or was that passed?
No, when we played SMU, they had it was right at the tail end of the June Jones era, and so they were back to slinging it around all over the place. That's when Garrett Gilbert had transferred from Texas and over to SMU, and Kyle Padron, these guys where they were throwing it around and going to bowl games, but they weren't. The big difference from then to now is for people that haven't followed this stuff, they have a ton of money committed to the football program that wasn't even just 10 years ago. And upgrades in facilities, massive backing in the NIL game. Obviously, you saw the commitments that got them into the ACC where they're just waiving their revenue dollars for 9 years, and they're not even concerned about it. They're like, we've got the money and the backing to do it. And in modern college football, that's what you have to be relevant. So I think people need to be prepared. Look, if you drop them in the ACC this year, I think they're not in the bottom 5. They're better than 5 or 6 teams in the ACC right now. And I think people need to get prepared for they will compete earlier than people probably give them credit for in the ACC.
Did you yourself, when you were at Rice, was that past any of the time when they ran the bone or anything option, or were you a part of that when you were at Rice?
No, we had some lingering guys that were older that had been recruited by Ken Hatfield to run the option, but by the time I got there, Bailiff had been there for a couple of years.
Okay, I was going to ask you about what it's like to run something like that, knowing your opponent only has 3 or 4 practices, if that many, to get ready for it. Memphis is playing Navy tonight. They've played before, but I was curious about that. But that answered my question. All right, just one more time. Where did you play college football?
Rice University, a big win, and looking forward to. I've got them this week against Texas Southern. They'll be favorites, and the opportunity to get to 2-1, which, as you guys know, Rice having a winning record in non-conference in September, that is not normally how it goes. So there's a lot of positive momentum, and I'm very happy for Coach Bloomgren and his team.
You should be, and a proud alum, Taylor McHargue, ESPN with us, college football analyst, on Thursdays at 4:30. I mean, he ought to be happy. He ought to be excited.
Absolutely.
I mean,